Hello, everyone, and welcome to our latest Bucks Trustees Network webcast. I'm delighted today to be joined by Alice Clementi from Charterpath, who's going to be talking to us about how to attract, keep, and motivate outstanding volunteers. So, welcome, Alice. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you, Henry, for having me. It's great to be here with you today. So, hello everyone. I'm Alice Clementi, the founder and CEO of Charterpath, a small charity supporting other charities by connecting them with people with financial skills. So, a bit about me. I'm a chartered accountant and I spent the first 15 years of my career in the corporate world in leadership roles in banking and finance. But alongside that, I was a regular volunteer. I started off driving a van, as you can see in the picture here, for a large homelessness charity before joining their risk and audit committee. I was a founding chair of trustees for a youth charity, and I now chair the finance committee for a leading girls' school. But as CEO of Charterpath, I've moved from the relative luxury of being a volunteer and a trustee in an oversight role to running a charity day to day, and I'm experiencing firsthand how much harder that is. At Charterpath, as Henry said, we're on a mission to promote volunteering, and today he's asked me to share some thoughts on how to attract, keep, and motivate outstanding volunteers. So, first of all, why do we need volunteers? There are over 400,000 charities, schools, and community groups across the UK, and we all know that these are not nice to have. These are organisations providing critical services from food banks to hospice care, crisis helplines, and everything to lifeboat services. Thanks to, first of all, the pandemic and then the cost of living crisis, demand for their services has risen rapidly over the past few years with rising cost bases, and at the same time, income has fallen, with donations down 10% year on year, according to figures released this week by CAF Bank, with 1 in 5 people just saying they can't afford to give. Now, as a result of this, 50% of small charities fear the risk of closure within the next 12 months, which is a really terrifying stat when you think about the services they provide for communities up and down the UK. In parallel to this, volunteering levels have also been in steady decline. So 10 years ago, 27% of adults volunteered regularly. In the latest national survey, this figure has fallen to only 16%, the lowest level since the survey began. And worryingly, the biggest fall was in the youngest age groups. As a result of this, 2 in 3 charities has at least one vacant trustee role. And that shortage of volunteers represents a huge amount of work, which is being done by existing volunteers and people working within charities. So if we can mobilise more people to get involved in volunteering and rebuild that pipeline, we could provide much needed support to charities. Now, one further reason to recruit more volunteers is also to improve diversity. The average age of a charity trustee in the UK is 65. That's the average age. And of course, that's not surprising in many ways because older people tend to have more time on their hands than those doing a busy job or with young children. But the average age 5 years ago was 57. So we're really seeing that fall in volunteering among young people impacting the average age, which will only increase the pressure on those volunteers when they want to step down. And we've also got a real lack of diversity in other characteristics such as ethnicity and sex. 92% of trustees in the UK are white, and I think the stat is something like 1 in 12 trustees is called John or David. Now, we know that diversity of opinion and background is not always easy to find, but it's hugely valuable, and to have people with lived experience on your board can make a real difference. So we urgently need more volunteers at charities. But how do we attract them? How do we keep them? And how do we motivate them? A lot of you watching this are probably volunteers yourselves, so you might know from your own experience what attracted you to volunteering and why you keep doing it. But the difference is that you've already been convinced to volunteer, and there is a lot of people out there who haven't. So, how to attract them? When we launched Charterpath, our initial focus was on finance professionals to say, come on, start volunteering, use your skills for good, you can make a real difference. But we also realised that charities weren't always helping themselves in how they advertised for volunteers. So here's a few kind of top tips which we learned. First of all, volunteering is a labour of love. People are giving up their time. You have to inspire them to do so. People want to understand about the work that you're doing and how it's changing lives or changing their communities and really impacting a cause that they care about. And they want to hear that through real stories, not just facts and figures. When people think about volunteering, a lot of them want to do something quite different from what they do in their day job. And that's really understandable, but sometimes it's easy to forget how valuable their day job and their skills and training are. So finance is a great example of this. If you can share with that volunteer how valuable what they do in their day job could be to your charity, then you can really help them see the value in this and motivate them to share their skills. You can also talk to them about the benefits to them of volunteering. They'll learn new skills, they'll grow their network and build their experience for their CV. It's definitely a two-way street. So next up, honesty is the best policy. Now, in the past, well, I'm certainly familiar with volunteers not really having role descriptions. We didn't really know what you were signing up for. We now see that many charities do have role descriptions, which is great, but they often are one of two extremes. Either they are so vague that volunteers are not really clear what they will be doing, or at the other extreme, they list every possible task and ask for every single qualification, which puts people off applying. And the best really is to be as honest and as clear as you can, but think about what you actually need and be realistic in terms of the support that you want, and also whether you can expect a volunteer to provide that. Third, try before you buy. Interview them, ask for references, meet them in person and have a chemistry test. Consider offering a trial period or encouraging them to shadow the board. And this should be a two-way street as well. Check that your volunteers got the right motivations, that you think you can work with them, and also that they know what they are getting into. And then lastly, look far and wide. Don't just use your own networks to find these people, because this perpetuates the diversity problem. If you want to have a strong board with different perspectives and skills and backgrounds, you need to advertise really widely. Use local neighborhood WhatsApps or community groups. Think about the types of skills that you're looking for and where best to find them, like which social media channel is better, LinkedIn or Instagram, for example. I heard a recent story going back to the try before you buy and references, where an individual was appointed to be a school governor, and within hours of the new appointment being announced, the governors were inundated with messages saying that the individual had been posting racist messages online and had been struck off from a previous role. If the school had Googled the individual, they would have known this immediately and wouldn't have had the embarrassment and wasted time in appointing them and then immediately asking them to step down. So the moral of the story is always do your research and check that the volunteers' values align with your charity. So we've talked about attracting volunteers. How do you keep them? So first off, get off to a good start. Or I could have named this, don't fall at the first hurdle. It is so important to have a good onboarding process for new volunteers, whatever their role, to set them up for success. So you want to talk them through the history of the charity, your vision, your strategy, your financial performance. Make sure they meet all the key people, both at the charity and other volunteers, maybe even meet some beneficiaries. Run through the role description and make sure that the volunteer is clear on the timelines and deliverables and where they can go if they are struggling with something. Second of all, time is precious and you do need to respect volunteers' time. Make sure that you are sticking to what you agreed in the role description and also checking in on how they're coping, particularly if they go a bit quiet. See if they're okay, if there's a way to reorganize things to support them. Make sure meetings are arranged well in advance, they're clearly planned and organised, maybe even 6 months, 12 months ahead. I've seen that working really effectively at charities. It helps volunteers to plan, and then you can also hold them to account. Also, thinking about times being precious, I come back to this piece about making sure roles are manageable, because often they're not, and it's something we see a lot in the world of finance volunteers. So often there is one individual that is appointed with the responsibility for finance and everyone looks to them for all things finance. It's an enormous role and you often do have to be retired to be able to provide the necessary hours to do it. And to be honest, it can be a bit miserable. The treasurer then leaves and it takes a long time to replace them as the role is so overwhelming. So it's really important to just think about whether that role is possible for a volunteer or if it should be shared, which takes me on to my next point. Share the load. Consider job shares. They work really well where two volunteers share a role between them, supporting each other in busy periods or if somebody needs to step away for a bit. it's important with a job share to have really clear communication between the two people sharing the job to make sure it works well, but it can be very valuable for a charity. Or a simpler way of doing this is just bringing on extra people in supporting roles. So maybe bringing on somebody as a volunteer, but not as a trustee. So maybe a deputy treasurer or just a finance volunteer to be able to provide support to the treasurer. And it's a really brilliant way of training people up and also preparing a succession plan for your charity. We see at Charterpath loads of young people that are really keen to start volunteering, but they feel that they don't have enough experience. But in reality, if charities can find very small tasks for them to help with as volunteers, it can be such a win, both for the young person who's learning and able to give back, learn new skills, but also for the charity, because if they do a good job as a volunteer in a very tiny area, they can be brought on to support with more tasks. And then the final piece of keeping volunteers is just really this better together. There's a huge amount of training out there, a lot of which is free. Reach Volunteering has just compiled a big compendium of trustee training, and I really would encourage your volunteers to undertake it. It's important so that they stay in touch with the latest developments in the charity sector, and also so that they feel supported, so they've got peers to talk to. There are now lots of online forums, whether on LinkedIn or different portals, WhatsApp groups, where volunteers can connect with other volunteers to share their questions and seek informal advice or moral support. So do encourage your volunteers to find those networks and make use of them. And then lastly, how do you motivate volunteers? I mean, feedback is the first thing that I would say, which might sound counterintuitive, but I think it's very helpful. It can be hard to give volunteers formal appraisals or feedback. If they're there of their own free will, they might resent being given a list of development areas, but equally it's a chance for you to recognise all the great strengths that they do bring to your charity. Volunteers have a huge amount to gain from volunteering, and if they're learning from it, that's even better. But what's important is that they also have a chance to feedback on their own experience. What did they enjoy? What did they find challenging? And how better could you make it work for both the charity and for the volunteer? And just as an aside on this, the Good Governance Code for Charities was updated in December 2025, and it's a really helpful tool for a board to assess its effectiveness, and it prompts some reflection on what works well as a board and for individuals, so where you could do more for listening to each other and making decisions, and it might be a helpful thing for your volunteers to input into as trustees. But then, of course, the most important thing for motivation is to celebrate success. And having been a regular volunteer myself, I know how important it is when people say thank you and recognise your efforts. There are often times as a volunteer that it gets really hard. There might be difficult conversations, might be much longer hours than expected, and a thank you goes a really long way. And I think importantly, it's linking the impact that volunteer has on the charity as a whole, sharing the bigger picture that they are contributing to, so that they can understand how valuable the work that they're doing is. And I think really linked to that, including volunteers in regular sort of real life events, introducing them to the beneficiaries of the charity, sharing the positive feedback and case studies, bringing them along to events, and maybe even nominating them for an award themselves. So it's been a very quick overview, but hopefully a useful reminder that attracting and retaining great volunteers does require some thought and investment, but it is a real win-win. Charities benefit enormously, and so do the individuals giving their time. And if you get the balance right, you don't just get volunteers, you get really committed, motivated people who add huge value and help to move your charity forward. I'd be really happy to take any questions, and if anybody wants to get in touch, they can find me on LinkedIn or alice@charterpath.org.uk.
Alice, thank you so much. That was a really interesting segue into the power of volunteering and managing volunteers. And it's interesting from my own experiences. I mean, I I started quite young as a volunteer, so I was definitely dragging that average age down a little bit. As I'm getting older, I'm obviously pushing it up. But just sort of the good and the bad of being a volunteer, and I thought, yeah, it was just the different motivations that you might have at different ages and if different backgrounds and so on. I thought it was really interesting to dwell on that for a second. And also, we are actually onboarding a few trustees now, so at Heart of Bucks. So it was really interesting and a really good reminder of some of the things we really want to get right. And I really like the point about getting it right at the very beginning. I thought that was an excellent point. So we're going to go away and check that we're doing all of those things on that list, I think. So yeah, fantastic. But we've got a couple of questions. And one from me, I think, just to start was, sort of how frequently do you think we need to check in or communicate with volunteers? What's a good yardstick for that sort of thing?
I think it depends on how often you're really meeting and how much work you're expecting your volunteers to do. I think it's a lot of the really small charities that I work with, they might only have 3 board meetings a year. And in which case, probably even just checking in once a year to see how they've found it would be sensible. If you're checking in too often, there's not enough time for them to have been working for the charity in between. But then, of course, if they're meeting more frequently, you might want to check in more often as well. And I think it also depends on the sort of nature of what's going on at the charity. So if the charity is having a particularly difficult period under stress for financial reasons, that's when individuals can find that there is more pressure on them. So again, just thinking about my background as a finance volunteer, where you often carry the weight of the financial success of the charity, even though it's everybody else's responsibility, all eyes tend to look at you as the one with finance expertise. And I think in those occasions when times are difficult, it's important for the chair of the board and maybe even the CEO just to check in more often and see that individual is happy with how things are running, whether they've got sufficient time, if they need more support, if a job share would be useful or a deputy. So I don't think there's a hard and fast rule, but it should be linked to the nature of what's going on at the charity and how often the volunteer is being asked to work.
Great, thank you. And then a question from our network was around balance. So how do you sort of offer the balance between, what's the best way, I suppose, of offering balance between this kind of structure and making things really easy to understand, and giving those sort of structured activities, but also that kind of autonomy that comes with being a trustee that sort of makes people feel motivated, that they're not being sort of, and I think there's a bit of a balance between the two, right?
Yeah, I think there is. And I think, again, it slightly comes down to the individual involved. So some people tend to really prefer, as a volunteer, having a really clear structure, knowing exactly what they need to do, being told how they need to do it and what's expected of them. And that's particularly relevant from people who might be new to volunteering, might be taking on, let's say, again, the treasurer role for a first time, and also people with certain styles. So again, I'm quite a sort of well-structured accountant. I like to be given quite a clear set of responsibilities and how to do things. But then at the other end of the spectrum, you've got people, as you say, that are volunteering because they want to give back, but they also want to kind of maybe do things slightly differently, and they want to have some kind of creativity as to how they deliver what they're doing. So maybe if they're working on the marketing side, for example, being able to explore different avenues. And I think it really is all comes back to both the interview piece or the onboarding and understanding your volunteers and what are they looking to get out of it? How do they like to work? How best should you interact with them? And then going back to your last point on that feedback, checking in, is it working for them? And it's a two-way street. It really is with volunteering. It needs to work for the charity, and that volunteer is delivering what the charity needs. It's not sort of an ego project for the volunteer. And you do have that a bit with, I've again been guilty from a finance perspective. You go in, you've seen it done in a certain way at PwC, and you want to apply that to a small charity, and the charity's there going, no, you're going to kill me if you want me to do monthly forecasts. It doesn't work like that. So, you know, the volunteer needs to respect and listen to the charity, but equally on the charity side, they need to make sure that the volunteer's getting out of it what they want, whether it's, you know, developing new skills, being able to lead on a certain project, so that that also, you know, helps their CV and builds their experience. And it just comes back to communication. It's so easy to have a distance between volunteers and the charity, even as trustees, where you've got this huge responsibility. You're only updated, you know, a couple of times a year on how the charity is doing. Whereas the more that you can bring it in and make it a sort of ongoing communication, I think people feel valued. They get to work in a way that suits them, whether structured or unstructured, and you really get the most out of it for both people.
That's great. Yeah, and I really get a sense that that kind of two-way approach, that seeing that the volunteer really has to be getting something out of it as well. It's not someone that can just be put upon to do absolutely everything. You know, it really needs they really need to feel engaged and part of the organisation. So yeah, I think that comes across really strongly. And then I'm just going to say one more question. We've got a little bit of time at the end. What one thing in your experience sort of best creates that sense of belonging for a volunteer? It's not an exam question, but I'm just going to give you that as kind of one reflection that you think actually that was a really good thing that charity or organisation did to bring that volunteer sort of into the fold.
Yeah, I think for me does go back to sort of celebrating success and feeling like you're part of the charity, and you're not just turning up to trustee meetings. And I'd give you the example of the Passage, which is this homeless shelter where I started volunteering first as a van driver before the FD of the charity saying, "Looks great, you're driving the van, Alice, but like, would you join our risk and audit committee?" And like you, I was really young. I was in my 20s. I wasn't qualified. I said, "I don't know if I can make a difference." He said, "No, you can, come on." And I had a phenomenal experience on this risk and audit committee. And one of the big things we were doing at the time was a big conversion of this building that they'd had to make it suitable for future kind of clients, but also to have some rooms for entertaining in different corporate spaces. And we were all invited along to the celebration, the launch of the new building and the sort of celebrations that went with that. And it sounds so simple and it sounds so obvious, but I think it can be easy to forget to include people in those kind of real life events, you know, especially in this world where we do a lot of trustee meetings, maybe virtually, people are spread throughout the country, but actually as a volunteer, seeing the impact of the work that you've contributed to, there's nothing better than that. Like, that's why so many of us do it, because it's so rewarding, and sort of feeling like you're part of a team and you're making a difference is really key. So yeah, I think that would be my standout tip.
That's brilliant, thank you. It seems sort of obvious, doesn't it? But I suppose there's something that could just fall away quite easily with volunteers. And I think, Alice, that might be the first time I've ever heard someone say they had a phenomenal experience on a risk and audit committee. So, yeah, that's, Alice, thank you so much for joining us. It's been an absolute pleasure. Great to get a little bit of insight into your work at Charterpath and the support you could offer, you know, charities and volunteers and so on. So really appreciate your time. Thank you very much. And yeah, great to see you.
Thanks for having me, Henry. Really appreciate it.